Good afternoon, everyone. It is 12 noon, at least here on the East Coast, and it is time for the Chicken Box. And so, if this is your first time joining us, welcome every Thursday from noon, and today it'll be from noon until 12:45. We talk about topics of interest to the African American community in an effort to dispel myths and challenge stereotypes, and it's a multi-generational show. And my two co-hosts, one of whom will not be here today, is Kevin. We miss Kevin. He comes on and he represents the Gen Xers. And so if there are any Gen Xers watching us this afternoon, let us know that you're here. Put your name right there in the chat. And then I'm Francis Tony Draper, representing the boomers. I know there's some boomers who watch. I bill myself as a boomer, as a millennial boomer. And then our millennial, Misha Green, who also is our DC editor, she will be joining us hopefully in just a few seconds. A few seconds. Again, I'm Francis Tony Draper, CEO and publisher of the nearly 130-year-old Afro-American newspapers, and we really are a media company. This is 2022, and so yes, we still do a legacy product, a weekly paper, for those who want to hold on to a paper. We have a beautiful cover of this week, but we also do most of our work through afro.com and through social media. And so we are glad that you're here. So grab your favorite beverage, grab your lunch. I have a bottle of kombucha. Some people say they can't stand the taste. I love it. And so grab your lunch, grab your water, go on and share this broadcast, because we have such an exciting topic to discuss on this afternoon. And so we want to hear from our special guest. I think that our millennial co-host, Misha Green, will be joining us, and just there she is. Hey, Misha, you want to say hello on this beautiful February afternoon?
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be with you all. I'm a little behind today because I was on another call. It's a busy day for the Afro, as it always is. But today is too busy in particular. But we are just so happy to be having this conversation. I know in particular, as a single woman, this conversation is going to resonate with me as I plan to hopefully find who God has for me.
How about that? This is a topic I think that will resonate across the ages. And so somebody might be saying, "What topic? What topic? What topic?" Today we're going to be talking about um, Black people versus mental health in relationships. How to keep from losing your mind up in here, right? And so we're going to be talking about mental health, but specifically within relationships. And we have an expert with us today, a very, very special guest. And so I'm going to ask our producer to bring her on the screen. And welcome, Dr. Mohammed. We are so glad to see you on today. Thank you for joining us on the Chicken Box.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. So our guest for today is Dr. I'll have a mental health breakdown if my camera doesn't stay right there where it's supposed to stay right. You all know this is a live show, so anything's liable to happen. But anyway, Dr. Janelle Perkins Muhammad is a psychotherapist and licensed family therapist with more than 15 years of experience in relationships and life coaching. Wow, Dr. Janelle. She's a graduate of the University of Maryland and Capella University. She's an adjunct professor at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. She is, listen, don't miss this. She is a culturally competent therapist. How many of y'all know everybody can't counsel us, can't work with us, can't do therapy with us? Because there's some things that there's some language that is not well understood across all racial lines, right? And so she's culturally competent therapist. She's helping to establish this new generation of clinical counselors, and she's licensed in Georgia and Florida, North Carolina, and South Carolina. She's committed to removing the mental health stigma. Because a lot of times, and she'll probably say this, when people talk about mental health, the first thing they'll say is, "I'm not crazy." Right, but she helps to remove that stigma, and so she provides multicultural counseling to everybody who seeks assistance, and then she believes that there's a deeper, more accurate understanding of mental health and wellness to transform relationships. And so she does workshops. She's a sought after speaker. She has a large client base, but I think she always has room for one more. And more importantly, or as importantly, I don't mean I said more importantly, she is family. She is also part of the fifth generation of the Afro family. And so we're so glad to have you. Welcome. So do you prefer to be called Dr. Janelle, Dr. Muhammad, Dr. Perkins Muhammad? I mean,
Dr. Janelle is perfect because the rest of it is a tongue twister. So Dr. Janelle works perfectly.
well, great. And so we are so glad to have you with us. I know I gave a long, in-depth introduction, but I didn't say everything. Come on, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you even get into this particular field?
Yeah, I really started out in ministry with family, and my parents were doing marriage excellence within our church, and we're constantly working with couples to assist them in figuring out that spiritual component for the most part of how their relationships were going to work. And what I recognized was that there was something else missing, and it was that 1, 2, 3 evidence based kind of steps of how do we recognize when there's something more going on? And while I'm big on praying in the spirit, laying hands, and let's get before Jesus and take care of this thing, I'm also now really big on recognizing what's really happening from an internal, emotional, mental perspective and how our history brings us to that place. So I decided to go back to school and say, how do we connect that spiritual component to this natural component so that when they all work together, we get that perfect, harmonious, but with grace kind of relationship?
Wow. So that is certainly sounds like it's certainly possible, right?
It is.
And it sounds as if people come to you out of sync, out of harmony, in that.
Exactly.
So we want to hear some tips around that. I heard Misha, I heard you say you really want to know about this topic because
I
it's something.
do. I'm very curious. I think that there are things that I found just in dating where I didn't know, from a mental health perspective or triggers, and not because of anything that I dealt with in my family. I have a great supportive family, right? Or not anything that I think really felt like, something that was a sense or root of trauma for me. But when it gets to my man, suddenly I feel a little bit more emotional, or I feel like, something that someone does that maybe a friend would say when it's my partner is very triggering for me. Suddenly, if I'm being criticized, or something that might be a suggestion for me feels like criticizing me, and seems like someone's
Mhm.
being critical. And so I'm very aware of my own sort of weird mental health things that come up, though I feel like I'm a pretty sound person in most cases that come up in relationships. So, I'm still on my journey to find the man that God wants for me. Hello, if you're out there, I feel you, and we're praying together. Uh, however, I'm curious to know sort of um, how mental health relates so closely with relationships, and sort of how do we balance it in relationships, and if that's something that I need to look into deeper as I find my proper partner.
Oh, what a
Right.
really great question! A question, Dr. Janelle, you want to take a stab at that?
Well, it's interesting because what I heard Misha saying was that she has this foundational background that leads her to a space where she recognizes that she really does have an emotionally sound space from which she shows up in relationships. The challenge is that we have so many experiences, and oftentimes those experiences trigger emotions, and we can't think. And before we know it, become dysregulated and don't have a really great ability to be introspective. And we say things we don't necessarily mean to say because we're speaking from that emotional space from an experience that happened so long ago. So it's really interesting when I talk to my clients, I tell them, think of the brain as a hand. So your amygdala, that little spot that's a little bit bigger than the pituitary gland, is where your emotions are actually held. Well, the hippocampus is where your memories are. Well, look how much of those memories, those experiences are touching those emotions. And before you know it, you get into these other areas of the prefrontal cortex and, all that good stuff, the insula. Well, when your emotions get tapped, this little heartbeat begins so quickly, and before you know it, there's an explosion, some sort of maladaptive behavior that comes out. And it shows up through anxiety, sometimes gets to the place where it's in depression, etc. And when you're sitting across the table from someone that you think should be seeing you differently, I'm cute, talk to me like I am. And suddenly they say something that triggers a memory of a little boy at the lunch counter when you were in the 5th grade who told you were ugly. Oh my goodness, now you think this man has said you're ugly. And all he said was, "You got a little something on your cheek."
Okay. So
Yes.
so you help people connect the dots.
Oh my goodness, do I. Absolutely.
You help people connect the dots. If you're just tuning in, this is the Afro American Newspapers a weekly show. We call it the Chicken Box, yes, with two X's, and our tagline is "Don't be a chicken, get on the box." And even though you're not here in the studio with the three of us, you can get on the box through the chat. We need you to get on the box. We want to know who's in the room, if you will, who's tuning in. And so let us know if you're here. Just sign in and say, "Hey, I'm here," right? Yep. Lenore Yancey, you're right. That is, we don't think about those things in those terms, right? Dr. Janelle, we just don't make that, like you said, it explodes. It's like putting the top on the board on the pan that's boiling, right? And then it just all of a sudden explodes, but we don't
Mhm.
go back and investigate what caused the explosion. So good afternoon to everybody who's tuning in. It may be morning wherever you are. It may still be morning. You may be on the West Coast. You may be in a different country, but we're so glad that you're here on the Chicken Box.
Mhm.
Now, Misha, we um, drive down, digitally drive down the digital streets every week just to see what people are saying on social. So you got anything for us from the digital streets?
Oh my goodness. Yes. The digital streets have been super busy and outspoken talking about Black people as we relate. I hate to say they as if I'm other, as we relate to mental health and relationships. Part of the reason why the digital streets have been so busy, and I bet everybody out there can say it with me, Kanye West, right?
Mm.
His whole relationship with Kim Kardashian, we know, has been on display. And of course, relationships even prior to Kim Kardashian, right? We knew about them because Kanye West is a celebrity. However, over the past years, and I want to say this in the most respectful way as a non mental health practitioner, we've seen moments of Kanye's mental health being challenged, if you will. And he's very publicly had breakdowns during his celebrity time, and in particular in the past few years. And now in his relationship with Kim Kardashian, we're seeing it play out in a major way, from him making threats and posts to Kim's partner now, to calling attention to the fact that he's having issues with his now estranged wife. And so those sort of things have had people talking. So some of these quotes from the digital streets are in relation to that. And some of these quotes are just in relation to mental health and Black people and relationships in general. And so, as always, I must emphasize these are solely quotes and opinions, not necessarily views of the Afro American newspapers. And so, the first is from XO Nicole. And of course, XO Nicole is a blog. And this article was called Black Men on How Mental Health Struggles Have Impacted Their Relationships. And one person says, I was showing up in relationships with baggage that I didn't even know I was carrying. We all want love and healthy relationships, but I wasn't aware I wasn't ready for any of it. Stephanie Castellanos wrote on Twitter, our idea of brown and Black excellence can't just be titles, degrees, owning property, and passport stamps. Let's talk about building healthy relationships, mental health, giving back to your community, exploring your passions. Victor Armstrong, who has a master's in social work, said Black men struggle with the idea of being openly vulnerable and sharing emotions. Simply saying Black men don't want treatment is lazy thinking. We need more research examining the relationships between complex trauma and mental health services used for Black men. Stop suicide was the hashtag. Raven K. Stringfield wrote, romantic relationships are really hard for me because I'm Black, fat, getting a PhD, and consistently dealing with mental health issues that manifest in me being overly anxious, literally any connection I have with folks, but especially in all caps, romantic one. Jabrisha wrote on Twitter, and I think us Black people have been conditioned to press down that trauma, and it ruins our lives, our mental health, our relationships. It's so effed up. Lonnie wrote, seeing Black people go viral because shaming others for how they choose to deal with their trauma is very disheartening, given the history/relationship our community has with mental health and therapy. And finally, Ziza wrote, Black people think you can turn off your mental health depending on your relationship to them. That's not how it works. So, Dr. Janelle, I know that was a lot. Again, the digital streets have been busy. But, considering Kanye, which I know is why a lot of these Black men are coming up and having these conversations and talking about their trauma, as well as some of these really pointed and people who are diagnosing their own issues. Where are you? What do you think about the digital streets and some of this uh, rhetoric regarding mental health in Black people?
Well, I hear all of that, and the first thing comes to mind for me is that the greatest generational wealth we can pass on is mental and emotional wellness. The ability to stop long enough and ask one another questions about how we're feeling, how we're thinking, and going beyond, oh, I'm fine, I'm too blessed to be stressed, and really digging deeper into those vulnerabilities. It's not an easy thing to do at all, but we have to stop saying things to one another like, "You cuckoo, you're bipolar, you're OCD," because that's how we just continue to exacerbate the stigma. And what we're seeing in Kanye and others who are having challenges, um, like the one that he's verbalizing, is that fear of abandonment. So that goes back to some attachment issues potentially. I have not seen Kanye in person. I do not treat him. I'm speaking simply from a space of recognizing what I have seen in others that he is demonstrating on the world stage. So that low self-esteem, the struggles that people have with setting boundaries, all come back to the space of not feeling that they're worthy or that they deserve to be loved and appreciated. And when they ask for it, oftentimes are rejected. So the digital streets are right. It's time that we stop pressing it down, putting the trauma aside, open up those doors and get treatment, not just talk to each other, but get treatment for the challenges that we face.
Wow, that is something. And so, you use some clinical terms, some clinical diagnoses that people throw around sometimes, and so might need you to break some of those down, like OCD and bipolar. You know, take us to school a little bit, but let me just stop for a moment and just acknowledge some of the people who are watching today. I want to say hello to Dana and Tracy, Reggie White Sr., Rena Washington, welcome. Diane Hocker, good to see you. Lenora is watching. Two Lenoras. We have a Lenora Housey and a Lenora Still Strong Yancey. And so Mandela Madison Youssef, thank you for joining us on today. Let me see. Um, Ali, I'm sorry, D. Lejean is watching. William Joseph Page is watching. If I didn't call your name, it's because it's not in the chat or I can't tell that you're there. So just let us know that you're watching. So we got a lot of people watching, Dr. Janelle. And so
Mhm.
we do tend to label people, don't we?
Mhm.
We put
We do.
labels on them because we've heard it, what, in popular culture or so tell us, if
Yeah.
somebody says you're OCD, what does that really mean? If they say you're bipolar, what does that really mean?
Yeah, we should wait until someone has truly been diagnosed because really what we're looking at is potentially a mood swing, right? When it comes to bipolar disorders, these drastic changes in behavior and mood that come very quickly and closely together. We are not necessarily talking about hormonal challenges because there are men and women who experience hormonal challenges. And during those particular times in their lives, they have those same types of mood swings, if you will. We're talking in bipolar about extreme highs and extreme lows that come over long periods of time. And when we look at someone who happened to be upset 10 minutes ago and now suddenly they're happier, we can't just say, oh, you're bipolar, because we're stigmatizing them. We're isolating them. We're causing them to want to isolate themselves. When in all actuality, it could be that they truly are triggered emotionally for some reason. OCD, if you really see someone with OCD, it is at a level where they cannot be in a room without everything being straight, without having to walk back and forth, if that's the way in which their symptoms work, without having to turn on light switches. People who are clean are not always OCD. They just like things to be clean. Some people don't want to live in filth and others do. And if that's your choice and you're happy in it and it makes you mentally and emotionally sound, doesn't impact anyone else, then live in filth or live in a very clean environment. But it doesn't always mean that that individual is living with some level of mental health disorder. And in relationships, it takes two people to make the changes that are necessary. So if you're in connection with someone that's bipolar, and they are getting help, wonderful. Work with them and learn what it means for you too to be in relationship with that individual. If they're not choosing to get the assistance they need, then you might need to make some different decisions about whether or not you're going to be in that relationship because the trauma that you experience by staying there can be just as impactful as if you had the condition yourself.
Okay, and so OCD, for those who don't know, is obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsessive
Mhm.
compulsive disorder. And so there's a question from Tracy Ball. Tracy, thank you for your question. And I see there's some others who are weighing in. We're glad to have you with us. Put Tracy's question back up for me, Taylor, please. How can you get them, whoever them or the other person, to recognize and accept that there is an issue?
Those are two totally different challenges.
Okay.
Recognizing it is really going to be a matter of having a physician demonstrate it to them. We can go to WebMD all day and find all kinds of ways to make everyone have a condition that we think exists, but they really need to see a physician or a mental health provider. Then the acceptance piece is a whole nother story. Sometimes it can be very challenging. In our community, we have made it a taboo to have any type of mental or emotional, psychological deficiency, is how we see it. But to be able to live with a condition means that you could potentially be on medication and nobody has to know. The number of individuals who are truly living with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or even personality disorders is so small. And yet we think it's much larger because there's so much information on the web about it. What we have to do is to be sure that we're supportive in asking those individuals we think are experiencing challenges to go and get the assistance they need.
Well, how do
That's
you
going to
do
make
that?
a
Yeah, but
how do you do that?
how
You
do you
say
teach to
you
even
say things like, "I've noticed recently that you've been behaving differently. Have you seen anything?" It could open the door to a good conversation. When you see things that are popping up, the way in which a voice goes up, because 97% of communication is nonverbal. So it's that tone of voice, which is not the words, right? It's the way in which people comport, the way they hold their arms, the way in which they look at you, the roll their eyes. We're quick for the smacking of the teeth, the rolling of the neck. You know how we do. So it's seeing those things and recognizing that there's a challenge with what's being said and then calling it to the forefront, actually talking about it. And the more you have an opportunity to open the lines of communication, it's another level of intimacy. Intimacy goes across four levels: there's cognitive, emotional, spiritual, and then physical. If you don't get the cognitive and the emotional together, which is that ability to be vulnerable and have a conversation about what you see and what you're experiencing, it's going to be very difficult to even dig deeper into the spiritual. And you're not getting you're not getting to the physical side. You can forget it because you don't know each other. So it's important to have conversations and ask questions and let each other know what you're seeing, be vulnerable, and put the defense down.
wow. Wow, and sometimes that's hard to do, right? Because we get into the heat of the moment, and yeah, we just don't do it. And so we've got a lot of people watching and listening to this conversation. And so Rudolph Nelson is watching, and Linda Downing is watching, and John Robinson is watching, and Shingo Sugar is watching. Karen Whiteside White High, we're glad to have you. Lillian Wilson, Jessica James is watching, Bonnie Deans. And Bonnie said, it is a great topic because relationships, um, break up. People leave relationships rather than working through. And I do quite a bit of what you do as well. And the number one issue people say they have is what? Communication.
Communication.
Communication. Maybe you can share with us a little bit about um, what's a good strategy for. I mean, before we get to the point of screaming and labeling and
Hmm.
leaving situations, do you have some advice for couples, for people who are in relationship or want to be in relationship?
Yeah, it's really important to just talk to one another. Ask those questions about, how you grew up, what were your favorite times that you spent with your family, understanding and recognizing that that individual's responses give you clues about who they are. It's how you develop your core belief system, your value system, understanding what it was like to be the third child out of six. There's a lot of communication that's going to come out of that, a lot of good information that's going to come out of that. The greatest thing that you can do is to really sit down and ask a person how they relate to other people. When do they think it's a good time to have a conversation about a problem in the relationship? 10 days after the problem has happened? Immediately? Setting expectations in relationships means that you have to have a conversation and it has to be intentional. You have to be impeccable with your words. Choose them carefully because you could trigger someone with your words. And if you find that they're responding to a particular word in a way that, makes you step back, then ask, well, what does it mean to you? Because I can tell you that what I've found in my 20 years of counseling is that even the word cheating is different for every person.
Oh, okay.
So you have to talk about those things so you get to the place where you can understand the emotions behind the argument.
That's wonderful. Well, I see our co-host, our Gen Xer co-host, has joined us. Looks like you're in the airport, Kevin, and right on time, Dr. Janelle. You said impeccable, so impeccable has now has now joined us. So
Mic check, mic check. Can you hear me clearly?
we can hear you clearly. I don't know how much of our conversation you've heard, but yeah, impeccable with your words. That's not always easy to choose
No.
words, right?
Yeah, it isn't. That's why it also makes sense to stop for a moment and take notes about what you're thinking and feeling. Um, we have to stop for a moment and be mindful of what we're saying and doing. Sometimes we talk about this idea of mindfulness and we see ourselves sitting somewhere, our fingers pressed together, humming. And that's not what it's about. It literally is taking that opportunity to be present in the moment in which you're in. So I tell my clients oftentimes, and it's funny because on my desk, I have this little card that I write the word should, could, ought, and then we put a circle around them, each word, and then put a diagonal line across it. Because the narrative that you set for your relationship is what you create. There are no shoulds, no coulds, no oughts. Be present in the relationship. And when you're present in that relationship, it's twofold. You now give the gift of your presence, and you also have the opportunity to receive from your partner their
Wow.
presence.
That's great. And so, Kevin, I want you to wait in a minute, but I want to ask Reggie White's question. There it is. He says, what can you do if both people say they're right? They don't want to compromise. My position is my position. His position is his position, or vice versa. And they're seeing a counselor, um, but everybody's intractable. They just holding on to their position. I mean, is
Hmm.
there, how do you break through that?
So there are these fair fighting rules that we look at. Fair fighting rules say that we bring in one subject at a time and we really pull apart that subject and get to the emotional root of that subject. And oftentimes you'll find that it's steeped in those experiences from generations of relationships within families. So couples come into the relationship each having their own experiences, each having their families having told them how relationships should work, could work, ought to work. And it means you have to toss that out and ask yourself, how do we want this to work in that one subject at a time? So I have couples who could be in counseling for literally years because they're really needing to pull it apart. But when we get to the crux of the emotional component, the spiritual foundation, 9 times out of 10 we're working in that in from that point of reference, but that emotional component tells us so much about why the argument means so much more than just what it is at face value. So
That's
it's
great.
digging deep.
It's digging deep and it's willing. I guess it sounds like it's a willingness also to stick with it
Mhm.
in counseling. Kevin,
Mhm.
well, impeccable. You had a question or a comment you want to make? We're glad to see you.
No, I was just chiming in. How you doing, Dr. Janelle? Good to see
Hey
you.
there. You
Hopefully
too.
you guys can hear me clearly. I'm really going to look back at this conversation because it's hitting all kind of spaces, especially if you're in any kind of relationship. But sometimes in the heat, a person needs a moment, right? And if the other person won't give a moment, you can't even get to that list
Mhm.
of taking a breath before you say something that you don't want to say. So you end up saying something that you say at the moment, and it's probably not the right thing to say, but because of the pressure. And guys, we're never gonna out talk the ladies. I don't care what rule book you know what I mean, and there's only a couple go tos, and that's usually a cuss word, and that never ends right. So, how do we get the other person to understand that I need to count to 10 and then I'll come back and talk to you? Don't follow me when I'm going. If I need a break, let's have a safe space of the break, and then let's come back, and then let's deal with whatever it is that we're dealing with.
Yeah, one of the things that we have difficulty with in our community is boundaries. We don't often believe that boundaries truly should be set within a relationship. And we certainly take the time to just kind of leap over them sometimes. So it's important to go back to those expectations. And I think that's why when we get ready to get into a relationship, our premarital counseling has to go deeper than whether or not you love Jesus and I love Jesus. Because the truth of the matter is that we both believe, yes, we do in our hearts. That doesn't do a whole lot sometimes when we're in a space where there's a battle over who should be disciplining the children, what ways that discipline happens, what money we're going to be spending in various places, whether or not someone is talking to another person on Facebook versus Instagram, and who's in your DMs, and all of that kind of stuff gets highly emotional. So when you set those expectations in premarital counseling, and you begin to talk about what communication really looks like for the two of you, then that's the time where you get an opportunity to say, sometimes I need an hour or two. I need to take a break. And please, if you allow me to take that break, I can come back having thought through this particular issue a little bit better. Otherwise, you're going to end up staying in that spot for much longer than you need to. And it's not just a matter of getting over it. Sometimes we have to say we're going to accept grace over perfection. None of us are perfect in any way. So it's grace over perfection. I have gotten in this relationship with you. So I'm going to give you the grace to say that you might not have meant to say that, and you're going to change. Now, I tell you, I see couples who do end up going their separate ways. And oftentimes it's because one person is unrelenting and has decided that no matter what, it's going to be their way. And we have diagnoses for that too,
Mm-hmm. Yep. And therapy for that.
and therapy for that.
Right. There's a way to break up.
There sure is.
If you get to the point where you just can't work it out, right, and have to give it up, there's a way to do that with the least amount of collateral damage, which is usually children, and then secondly, joint possessions, right, like
Mhm.
houses and cars and bank accounts and things like that. So, Dr. Janelle, we didn't ask you, and so if somebody wants to get in touch with you, and they're long distance, I know that you're not in the DMV area. So do you do counseling remotely by way of Zoom or another platform? How does that work?
Absolutely. So
Telemed?
I do coaching for those individuals who are outside of the licensure area, and who don't necessarily, or they're mm, don't necessarily have insurance that would cover them in these particular states that I'm licensed in. So they can reach me at tmicounselingandcoaching.com.
Say it again.
We
Say it again. We're gonna put it up on the screen.
TMI,
Huh?
the Marriage Institute, counselingandcoaching.com.
Okay.
I'm on Instagram at tmi.drjanelle. And we have a Facebook page that is Facebook TMI Counseling and Coaching. So it's possible that wherever you are in the world, because I've had clients who are overseas, that I can see you. And I have two other counselors on my staff. We're growing exponentially. COVID has opened our eyes more than we probably thought to what's happening within relationships, in particular in mental health in those relationships. So I marry the two, mental health and the relationship, so that you get an opportunity to truly see what's happening and how you're being impacted.
Okay. So one of our viewers wants to know, are sessions covered through employers' EAP programs?
They are. They absolutely are. It just depends on your EAP. So you'll want to give us a call. We're 843-872-6411. And we would then be able to determine whether or not your EAP is covered and whether or not we're in your network.
Okay. Say that number again so we can put that up as well.
843 eight
Mhm.
seven two 6411.
Okay, so just give you a call and you'll let us know if it's covered. That's great. So there's the number up on the screen, and also the Instagram handle, Facebook, and the website. All of that. Glad to know that you're growing exponentially. Are you finding that are more African Americans are more open to, because history suggests that we are not really open to therapy. What do you find?
Yeah, that's our history, and I'm so glad it's going to be in the past. We are doing so much better at being vulnerable enough to come forth. And it really is because of some of the work that I'm doing too in assisting counselors in becoming more culturally competent. So within those licensure areas, I supervise those who don't look like us in particular and help them understand some of our vernacular, why we function the way we do, why we don't necessarily want to come see them. Because in studies that I myself have done, what I've found is that counselors have a tendency to offer socially acceptable responses on assessments like multicultural skills surveys. But if you go and take the implicit association assessment that was accomplished by Harvard University, you find that they're not as culturally competent anymore. Suddenly they have an implicit bias that they don't want to talk about. Why? Because it's not socially acceptable. So we are opening up even more now to going to counseling. 95% of my caseload is African American. And then the others who come to me come because they say, you tell us the truth. You don't just listen and say, okay, I literally will stop. The one thing I say is, I'm not on your side or her side. I'm on the side of the relationship. So if there's something going on that's not right, I'm going to tell you. You're going to get the truth. You might not like it. You'll leave saying you're never coming back. But I promise if you really want to change, you'll come back.
Mm-hmm. Yep, if you really want to change that's good. That's good. Hey, Jewel, I see you signed in. Let's see who else have I not called out. Diane Sorrells, thank you for being with us. Franklin Muhammad, good to see you. That sounds like a familiar last name. Carol Jackson, we're glad to have you as well. Let me see who else that I have not given a shout out to. If I missed you, um, then I'm just scrolling too fast. But we're glad that you're on, Linda Downing. Glad that you're on. I think we got mostly everybody. Well, we're almost out of time, and I know Misha has to jump off to do another live, so we were going to wrap up a little earlier today, but we can't leave without your Afro facts. So every week we do an Afro fact. So Misha, do we have an Afro fact for this week?
Of course, we have an Afro fact for this week. And I have to say that this one, what was not necessarily related to our conversation, but I think can be a trigger and into the mental health arena, and really a way for us to look at back historically, sort of how we've been marginalized to get us to this place where we're triggered in our relationships often, as I think Dr. Janelle said earlier, from places of like we don't even realize, right? But maybe in this case, I wonder if some of these children may have been affected from a place of not having things or seeing struggles. So here's today's Afro fact. It's inspired by the February 24th, 1962 edition, when the headline read, "Denied welfare aid, mother of 4 kids fights for life." And the article talked about the difficulty of her getting welfare and her father having to stop her from doing desperate measures such as giving up her kids or killing herself as she was struggling. And her father tried to support them on his DC teacher salary. And the mother and her kids both were sick. The kids ranged from ages 4 to 11, 2 boys and 2 girls. The youngest girl suffered from asthma, and the oldest boy had just recovered from rheumatoid fever. And the family was facing eviction from their 3-bedroom apartment, paying $65 a month. And with all that, the welfare office still denied her assistance. And so this is an unfortunate story of not only systemic racism, but also how this family really battled. And that's this week's Afro fact.
Wow, and that's 60 years ago, and we can still relate in 2022. Well, we're at the end of the show, and this is where we hop on the box and just have 30 to 40 seconds, and maybe 60 seconds for you, Dr. Janelle, or more, just just your closing thoughts. Misha, we're going to come back to you first because I know that you are getting off for another show, and so we want to come to you first. Let me again thank everybody for tuning in to this week's Chicken Box. We are so glad to have you with us. Please, not because it's African American History Month, but because we really do need your support. Won't you go to afro.com and consider a subscription? $40 a year for the digital, $100 a year for both the digital and the print. And guess what? You can have the print come to your house and you can give the digital to somebody else, or vice versa, whatever works well for you. You could also text Afro to the number on your screen, 410-936-5002. We want you to just hang in there with us. This is our anniversary year. We'll be 130 on August the 13th. We're having a big gala if you're in the DMV area at Martin's Crosswinds. But before that, we have a Black Business Matters Expo, March 24th. And the theme is Women Who Win. And then we have two high teas. We're going to come back in person in Baltimore on April the 23rd, and then in DC on June the 26th, 2 to 5, both of those dates. You can get all of that information on afro.com. Thank you for your support. And I feel like I'm on the box. I'll jump back on the topic though. So Misha, we're going to go to you first, and then Impeccable, we're going to come to you if you have anything you'd like to say. And if I have anything else to say, I'll add on. And then Dr. Janelle, you'll get the last word. Again, thank you everybody for tuning in. All right, Misha, you're on the box.
Yes, I appreciate Dr. Janelle so much. As I started this conversation earlier today with, this is something that I think helped me and I knew was going to help me as I consider, how I relate to the people around me and hopefully continue to build relationships and hopefully get a man, a husband very soon. So in that regard, I just thank you so much for your time and your dedication to this work. It's so important. I'm going to use this time on the box to answer Mandela's question, which was, how do I make sure to get alerts for the next show? There are two ways you can do that. First of all, just remember, Mandela, every Thursday at noon, we are live on the box for you. But with all things Afro News related, you are able to like us on Facebook. And as soon as you like us on Facebook, you'll get the notification that we'll be live. And that's with anything from Chicken Box to Afro Live to Afro News at noon to Face to some of the special sort of branded content, etc., that we do for you. And as Dr. Draper mentioned earlier, of course, you can join our text program by going to texting 410-936-5002 for updates on future episodes. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, Misha. All right, Impeccable. Your final thoughts.
I'm on the box. I'm boxed in like some men. They just all boxed in. They got their fists tight. They got their cheeks tight. And I didn't mean to say that. They got their jaws tight. They got everything tight. And so when it's time to make a change, we want to be unchangeable sometimes. And as men, when we can't figure out how to be unchangeable ourselves, I think the route is that we should try some coaching or some counseling. And a lot of times, guys, especially Black men, we're not trying to hear that. We're trying to just be mad, and we take that anger all the way through. And then once the relationship breaks up and falls all apart, then we wish we would have done something. So let's do something now before you get so tight that you lose your family. So that's my minute on the box, Dr. Janelle. You know how we do. All right, I'm going to say, what's up, cuzzo? Anyway, because we family. So I just wanted to say that. I'm on the box. I'm live. This is the first time 5G works, I guess. Am I freezing up or am I really clear?
You're good. You're good. You're good.
All right. Well, I guess I'm going to start going on location and really seeing what's happening on these streets. Talk to you soon.
Okay, yeah, you got to ask some of the people in the airport what they think about this, right?
Oh, yeah, they got tight fists. They're going to be, I can tell when a couple gets on the plane and they like each other, they're going to touch and hug. But when they having some problems, boy, that posture, they could be sitting in the middle seat. Their legs won't even touch. But anyway, That's my moments on the box.
All right. So I'm going to jump on the box just for a moment. So I'm just going to say, listen, if you had heart palpitations, you go to a cardiologist. If you fell and broke your leg, you'd go to an orthopedist, right? If you have a toothache, you go to a dentist. Relationships are the same way. They're relationship doctors. That's what I'm going to call you, Dr. Janelle. They're relationship doctors who are credible, who are qualified, who are culturally competent. And so I just want to encourage somebody that, if you're in a relationship and you want to even have a better relationship, you don't have to wait till you have a problem to have coaching and or counseling. And if you're considering marriage, remember the wedding is one day, the marriage is for a lifetime. And so treat yourself. I call counseling or treating yourself, right? Because where else can you go for 50 minutes or an hour where somebody will listen to you like that? Right. And then just reflect back what you said and have your best interests at heart without interruptions. But if you're contemplating marriage, come on, invest in your relationship, get the premarital counseling. And if you go to somebody and they say it's 2 sessions and you're done, that's not the right premarital counseling place. You want some place where you can really dig deep and find out about his family, about your family, her family, your family, what the expectations are, what the finances look like. You look at the credit score before you get married, not afterwards. But anyway, so that you can have all of that in line. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. I'm off the box. Dr. Janelle, you get the last 30 to 60 seconds or whatever you'd like to say. And we thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was perfectly said. I think one of the greatest things that we can do is to really seek counseling before we even get to the place where there's a challenge. Call it an enrichment session, call it maintenance, and be intentional about getting into a space where you literally spend more time taking care of each other than you spend doing your hair, your nails, shopping, riding the bike with the boys. You have to take care of one another. And if that means that you have to therefore set aside your ego, therefore set aside your own desires so that you can be open to your spouse, to your partner in that relationship, then you do that so that you can be healthy. Show your children what healthy relationships look like. I'll end with the greatest generational wealth we can even begin to give has so little to do with money and so much more to do with mental and emotional wellness. So we can even know what to do with the money.
Wow. What a good note to end on. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Taylor Miller, for being our producer behind the scenes. Thank you, Dr. Janelle. What wonderful information. I know that you've got some emails and calls coming. And so you said you're growing exponentially. I see your practice even growing even larger. And so thank you for investing in relationships. We appreciate you. And there are not a whole lot of people, believe it or not, in the scheme of things that look like us who are licensed. We got a whole lot of people have advice, but who are trained and licensed and passionate about it and really look at it as an investment. And so thank you. We appreciate you. And so goodbye, everyone. See you next Thursday at noon. Until then, I'm Frances Tony Draper, CEO and publisher of the Afro American. Please go to afro.com. Looking for you to support us there as well. Take care and goodbye.